All right, we're rolling. We'll
Well,
riff
thanks for
on.
having me.
Yeah, no worries, man. Um, well, I should do the intro, which is "Welcome back, you filthy exiles." For anyone who's watching, and Buffalo, have you got a intro for your channel, mate?
Hey, everyone, welcome. This is Baron.
All right. So we gather here on this momentous of occasions to do a bit of a riff. So obviously, with all the stuff that's going on with, I guess, Path of Exile 2 and everything else, we thought as two creators, and we might do this as a consistent video moving forwards, or maybe even a podcast down the track. Um, that we would have a bit of a talk about stuff, in particular, some of the mechanics and some of the observations around Path of Exile 2 and ARPGs at a large. And yeah, so we've got a bunch of things to talk about. We'll put a list of that in the description below. And anyway, yeah, you got any interesting insights before we crack into the questions that you wrote?
Just, yeah, no, I mean, we've got a lot of stuff to cover. This is an interesting discussion, and I see a lot of people taking really extreme polar positions one way or the other. I just think there's a lot more nuance there than I think often gets addressed. So I'm glad we're getting to dive into it.
Yeah, no, I just dragged the document across the screen. That's right. We'll cut to like an image of Buffalo,
Oh, yeah.
Baron. Yeah. Um, Okay, so I guess talking down the first question, and we had it on the list here. Is there a place for skilled player combat mechanics in ARPGs? And what point does a lack of such mechanic turn a game into a hold down cursor for slot machine simulator? So if you want to intro into that one, I'll jump on when yeah.
Yeah. When I think about that second part, the hold down cursor for slot machine, I think back. I didn't play Path of Exile 1 during the Gorge days, the old Gorge days, but that's the thing that people bring up when you talk about that, right? That every Path of Exile 1 player just wants like a straight line, no obstacles, hold down their cursor and pick up the loot. That's kind of the stereotype. And like, look, there's some element of it that if I'm in the zone and I've been playing for 3, 4 hours, like I don't know if I want my brain fully engaged in combat the whole time. But yeah, I can imagine there's a point you could get to. I don't think we're there. Imagine there's a point you get to where it would be, it's just a dressed up walking simulator. Um, I think there is a place for combat, meaningful combat, having to pay attention to the monsters in ARPGs. But I think you can modify it, restrict it. I think like maybe you say only super juice content or uber bosses or whatever. Like in those cases, you kind of have to dodge and weave. But I think there's a place for the kind of the brain off. Like let me just zone out and put YouTube on or whatever and click through. So I don't know. What do you think? Where are you at?
I think we're both working men, and I think this is a really good question because like as you'll know and I'll know and many of the people watching this video, when you come home from like a 10 to 12 hour day at work, the last thing you want to do is click space all the time. And this is one of the biggest, I think, criticisms that we see is like where for if we talk about Path of Exile 2 as the main context here, right? So where exactly do we see this direction going? Like, do we want to be sweaty handed and just constantly tapping away at the keyboard 24/7, not able to look up at your Netflix stream that you might have sitting up above your monitor or whatnot? As a Delve player, like I like to turn my brain off, and there have been cases where when Vortex was a build in Path of Exile 1,
Oh,
mate, I fell asleep all the time playing Vortex Occultist, right?
yeah.
It was just like, you wake up, you're like, oh, I'm still alive. Oh, things are
Well,
just like,
yeah.
oh, but I guess
Righteous fire.
exactly RF, like same deal, like RF jugs when that was like a big thing before the nerfs came in with the gem level or the fire damage.
Yeah.
I guess the thing that like there is a middle ground maybe with Path of Exile 2 that it doesn't have to be the same way as Path of Exile 1. Um, and
Nope.
Diablo 4, I can't really talk to because I think like that sort of is what it is scenario with Diablo 4. But I don't necessarily think like that whole game was built around the whole dodge roll mechanic. Some of the things that sort of stick out as really odd in Path of Exile 2 right now are the inclusions of things like unwavering stance, for example. So Unwavering stance is where you don't get light stunned, which was in the last patch, but also you can no longer dodge roll. Well, and this is a thing that I noticed when running a tankier build in some of the off meta stuff that I've been testing, in particular Thorns, is like with the Cobra fight, for example, at the end of Act 3 in PoE2 right now, you're almost like 100% targeted to the notion of having to hit the dodge roll button. Whereas you've got mechanics that exist in the game that say, well, you don't need to run the dodge roll button. I think like there's a middle ground where the devs need to basically go, okay, we want this like more meaningful level of combat, maybe on the ordinary level of play, but it shouldn't be built around totally using dodge roll as a reliance mechanic. Like you have to dodge roll to be able to. And a really good example of this is with Titan Quest 2 when the devs did their interview, and they basically said in their initial interviews was that they didn't want players to feel like they're locked into having to rely on the dodge mechanic. Like you could physically move around, which is how Path of Exile 1 works. Realistically,
Yeah.
like what we're looking for is probably a toned down Path of Exile 1 with added dodge in there if you so choose to use it. But otherwise, if you're good at positioning, you should be able to position around the boss similar to PoE1. And that's probably the middle ground I'm looking at when I think of it. But I don't know, what's your take on that?
I think, and not to get too tangential, but I think this kind of speaks to a larger issue, or like a more widespread issue in Path of Exile 2, like firm guardrails versus nuance. Like I'm cool with the idea that dodge roll is in the game, that it is often the right thing to do, but talk about resolute technique or just building tanky or what don't say you 100% have to dodge roll or else it feels bad or you just die. Like it's okay for that to be in the game and that to be even the majority thing that you want to do, but like let me build around it.
Hmm,
Let me play around it. It you know, yeah, not to go too far down deep, but like there's other stuff in the game that kind of makes me think that like they've got these kind of firm guardrails in their brain for how they want things to work, and like that's like I like the concept of it, but
hmm.
give us a little bit of flexibility.
Exactly.
Um,
This whole argument of player agency, and like even with the locking of skills, and I guess we won't talk about that immediately, but like the locking of
and
skills
we'll
to
get to that.
weapons, yeah, that's down the track in there. Um, but like to give players choice, which is what happens in Path of Exile 1, you've got all the movement skills and stuff like that. Even in Diablo 4, you've got different abilities to get out of whatever you're doing, or the dash or whatnot. And even like last Epoch, right? Dodge roll was added in later in the game, and that arguably
Hmm.
is not a bad thing because it means the game wasn't designed around dodge roll, but it's an advantage that you can then use moving forwards. So, yeah, and then there's a bit of balance that goes into making that work. But the agency for players to be able to choose whether or not they want to use it, I feel is something that Path of Exile 2 will eventually get to, because if they didn't expect that to be something to be added in, right, they wouldn't add things like unwavering stance in the first place. And maybe it's what we'll
Right.
see when sword builds come in. Like, I'm assuming there will be like a dual sword block at some point because they'll want to match something with parry using dual wield or something like that. And mechanics will change. And this sort of comes back to the reasonable stance of that. It's an early access and a lot's going to change from now to when we get to hopefully the end of the year when the game's completed. But, based on the trajectory currently, that may not be the case. But that sort of segues maybe into our second point that we got here.
It does. I was about to say the one last thing that I want to say about this is a perfect segue to the next, which is that when you ask the question, is there a place for skilled player combat in ARPGs? The answer is yes, but let's be clear to draw some limits here that an ARPG is not something like Bloodborne, Dark
Yeah,
Souls 3, whatever. Like it's I understand that elements of that may appeal to people, but by its design, the core, like the pillars of the game underneath it all, the idea that you're assigning skill points, getting better gear, getting better combinations of gems, and making your character stronger mean that there is some emphasis on like is the idea that you need to do all those things and then also on top of that still be an elite mechanical player. Like I
yeah,
would play those games if I wanted to play those games.
yeah.
So anyways, this it's a good segue.
Oh, I like this, and this was the whole argument where like you're doing build guides in Path of Exile 1 as an example, right? And you always had like people go in and say, "Can it do pinnacle bosses?" and or Ubers. Ubers is a great argument. Ubers is a fantastic argument because arguably, right, in PoE 1, and not even talking about PoE 2, Ubers were a skill check, but they were skill check
And
once your stats were totally in line. Like you could do everything else with crazy stats, and that devoid of some builds like ice trappers and things like that. Right, they were just totally uppy, but totally designed for like one hitting Uber bosses at the end of the day. Right, and they were terrible at mapping and whatnot. And some people in the comments might disagree with me, and that's totally okay. But for the most of it, Ubers in PoE 1 were a skill check, like Maven, or if you talk about like, Uber Cyrus, for example, the nightmarish beams coming out that would insta destroy you and whatnot. And like
yes,
that would be the difference between being a player that could play any Uber boss in the game and just farm that day and night to any player that could play the like or just pinnacle boss versus playing the Uber pinnacle boss, which would be like the difference is the skill check. And like if we go to like Path of Exile 2 right now, there's a real like emphasis, and this is probably some of the early arguments on the point 1 patch when the game first came out, where people were like, oh, I like the difficulty in the skill level required. But like you really look at like Jamenra is a great example of I some people disagree with this point, but I think it's a horrible boss fight in Path of Exile 2 right now. And the reason why is there's an element of force skill requirement, which is simply just dodging all the AoE that comes at you, and the hits,
yeah.
which then are hard to telegraph because they track really close to when you're supposed to dodge. There's not a lot of degree of leniency to you getting hit or not getting hit. But then the actual enemy is just a meat sponge. So you just have to hit the enemy. Like a lot of players on Warriors just mace strike the enemy into oblivion because mace strike, and this comes back to like the skills themselves being locked at certain levels and not allowing being allowed to progress it up further, and gear numbers, like you look at like the monk, for example, this dichotomy between skill and gear is a problem because like a lot of the monk quarterstaffs are actually much more powerful earlier on than many of the other weapons in the game like maces, so that gives you a much easier progression. Like I'm playing through on a monk right now, totally night and
And to an
day.
extent, that's a balance thing, right? Like,
Mm,
to an extent, that just goes to, like, maybe they need to tweak the numbers on maces or whatever,
yeah.
but not all that.
Yeah, exactly. Like how much of that how much of, and this is the question that I guess comes back to GGG to figure out at the end of the day. How much of like that is balance, and how much of that do they expect to be the difference between the stats and the skill? And this is currently some of the imbalance that we feel with like, even like we look at like the initial like start to the point 2 patch where people were getting decimated coming into the first zone. Like the first thing I felt when I got hit by the first enemy was, holy crap, my health bar just went down to half.
Yep,
Like,
same.
do they expect skill from that, or do they expect that to be a stat based exercise? And based on the history of Path of Exile, it's been stats based predominantly. And then, like, you would juke and kite as you would in any other game to get away from the enemy. But basically, how they've designed a lot of enemies is they've created T1000 Terminators, and like, are you going to dodge roll that? But then you're going to get mobbed, and then you get pushed, and that actually did get fixed, so that was a good fix. But like, how like what is the expectation between what gear stats should mean and what meaningful combat should mean? Yeah.
So should we, the official next question is: can mandatory pack by pack meaningful combat coexist in a game with meaningful gear and skill tree builds, or does overemphasizing one or the other automatically downplay the
Mm,
importance of the other? And like, clearly they both exist on sliding scales, right? Like in a given game, you could assign it like a 0 to 100 point value. To what degree is player power based on what the player can do, and to what degree is player power based on what the equipment can do?
mm,
So you've got some games where your equipment does virtually nothing for you, like not ARPGs, totally other genres. And it's, like, look at like a Jedi Survivor, Jedi Fallen Order kind of a thing, where you're like, it's just, can you dodge at the right time? Can you see what the enemy is doing and get around 'em, all that stuff? And then you've got games, and I think Path of Exile 1 approaches this, where there is a high degree of emphasis on, like, if you can just put the investment in, you can trivialize whatever you want. You can
yes.
trivialize an uber boss, like you said, use an ice trap build. You can trivialize, do your lightning arrow, dead eye, mapping, whatever. Um, but it's not all that. Like you don't start that way. There's always going to be a point in the league, often for a while, where you do have to be cognizant of what the enemy is doing and go around. So it's not like any game that we're talking about with ARPGs is going to be 100% one or the other. It's about where kind of does it fall on that scale? At what point, if any, does player skill kind of fall away? Like, can I get to a point where I can delete, you know, tier four arbiter or whatever?
Yeah.
Um, and right now, there are builds that do that. Not a lot of them, but they're there.
Yeah. And then you've got the other ones that are like, the sweaty hand, like, and I think there's like a mid ground between those two elements that needs to be struck. So you've got two extremes right now that exist. You're either running like in point one, it was like stackers, right, running Pillar of the Cage
Yep,
God and Hands of Wisdom and
that was
Action,
the way.
and just blasting, or like mana stackers, for example, that were running Archmage.
Spark. Yep.
Now you've got lightning spear, which is just cracked as all hell, and there's a few other builds that exist in there too, that I noticed as well that are just absolutely ballistic. Is that what like PoE 2 is supposed to be designed around, or is it supposed to be toned down, and is it a mid ground, or is it like at the bottom end where you just don't have the power and you're going to be in a fight for like 20 minutes? Like, it's one thing that sort of confuses me a bit about the direction of the game currently, because like it's one of those, like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like you there's got to be some form of like, I'm firmly in there should be an in between. Like, I don't think a fight should take like 10 minutes or anything like that, but I also don't think a fight should take 15 seconds, or even like sometimes 20 to 30 seconds is too short too, because what is the point of pushing that content? And that's where players are like, oh, it's pointless to run the game because it's way too easy. But then we're then calibrating based off cracked builds that can do that. And that's the
Right.
problem. And that's the stats
That's what
part.
I was hoping to get to that because, like, yeah, here's the thing. We're in a game with a lot of players and an open economy, and so far, they haven't put, like, a top end ceiling. They haven't ruled by fiat and said, like, "You will not do more than X DPS." So,
Mm.
in that situation, there's always going to be players who are going to design for deleting the boss. They're going to do whatever they can, make a glass cannon, put 13,000 mirrors into it, whatever, and that will be out there. And the question is, and I'm saying this knowing that I have an answer to it, is should you design around that? Should you say that even that build should take 30 plus seconds to kill a boss?
Yeah.
And I'm very hesitant to do that. I don't think I would want grinding gear games to adopt that philosophy because one of two things would happen. Either you make all other builds terrible at that fight and it takes a half an hour, or you take a like if other builds can do it, meaningfully well, like the really good build takes 1 minute and the okay build takes 2 minutes, then you've really compressed the range of quality
Yeah.
of builds. And that's what's so compelling to me in an ARPG is this idea that, like, I'm going to start weak and there's this smooth progression where I can get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I can see out there on the horizon, like, even if I'm not going to do it this league, I don't have the time or the patience or whatever to build that deleter. Somebody could.
Mm.
Somebody could build something that could beat Uber Cyrus in 2 seconds or, whatever the end game boss is, so, like, I'm hesitant to recommend that they rule by fiat and say, like, "This boss must take X amount of time." You know what?
Yep.
There's gonna be sweaty gamers out there, whether you talk sweaty in terms of, like, moment to moment clicking or in terms of spending 23 hours a day and putting a million mirrors into their build. Can We shouldn't balance around those players, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're like if you looked at it statistically, like they're an outlier. And unfortunately, I think like what we see quite often with a lot of the other creation material that comes out and whatnot are those outliers where like someone has like one build, and that build is cracking the boss in like 2 seconds or something like that. And it's an enigmatic build that is a total one-off. Like it just, yeah, and it's the same existed in PoE 1, still does to this day. I think
Absolutely.
the design mechanic in PoE 1 is fine around this. I think if anything, what I can see is the skills that don't perform. Like I give you an example, Fangs of Frost, for example, is trying to get working. Some of the problems that exist to make some of the builds work right now are mana costs seem to be one of the biggest
Mhm.
issues.
Yep.
At least that's what I run into. Like, how do you balance it on a build where you can't elemental leech, or you've got to come up with arbitrary solutions like running Thief's Torment, which means you can't run other different rings that you would need to optimize the build. Like, there's a lot of limiters in the way that gearing attributes and mana sustain work in the game currently, which, like, I'm trying to get a Molnir build working right now, so I've got to get
All
248
that.
strength on a monk. um and
Good
I've,
luck.
oh mate, I've mapped it and it's not going to be easy, but like there is the challenge part of that where like I'm excited to get it to work, but then I have to sacrifice so many other things that I need to make the build balanced, in particular in a defensive way. So I've got to come up with different solutions to come around and beat those problems. But the other side of it is then it's just not, the game is just like it pigeonholes you into this build should do this, this build should do this class should do this specifically, and it's like, heralds being locked to weapons. Like I'm not a fan of
Yes.
that. Like I think some things should, the one that got to me was, the thunder leap that's on the spear skill.
Yeah.
Why would that be locked to spears? Like that's something that to me makes no sense, because like it's an arbitrary skill. It could actually be really good with hammers. And
Yep.
I feel like over time, and the argument that, oh, it's locked to the skill, we can't change that. Well, they also said that they're changing the rigging in the game, or they changed the rigging in the game, so they should be able to pretty easily retrofit that to hammers. Um,
I talked about this in my most recent video, honestly. This is one of the many guardrails to get put in place that, like, and we're in, I guess, some danger of getting off topic, but it's a good one, so I want to talk about
yeah,
it.
let's talk about it.
This idea of it's thematically meaningful, it's lore accurate, it's, it gives a sense of feel and identity and stuff. Like, I get that, but is it fun? Like, is that enough to overcome the fact that, like, I wanna do it with a mace or a sword when they come out or whatever? Like, like, fine, I can't do a skill that's called lightning arrow, I can't do that with a mace. Fine,
Yeah,
that's
fair game.
my limit. I can accept that, but, like, this feels like, and there's so many examples of it. It's not, if it was just one thing, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, but there's so many examples of the crossbow skill that can break armor but not consume broken armor, and then the crossbow skill that can consume broken armor but not break armor, and, like, you've got these lanes that they've set up for you. It's like you said, you've kind of pigeonholed into, like, doing one thing, and I feel like that takes away some of the creativity that you're talking about, the fun of mapping out, like, how am I gonna solve this problem?
Hmm.
More tools is better. I think I accidentally took us, to the next bullet point, actually.
I'm okay with
Uh,
that. So the next one is, should ARPGs ever have a point at which skill mechanics can be entirely trivialized or ignored through gearing? At what point of time investment? At what point of time investment is that relevant? And can an RPG be good if it doesn't give players the potential to do this? And I think, like, yeah, we started to encroach into this point a bit. So one of the things I don't like is skill gem locking to weapons. There are some that, okay, fair game. Arrows, crossbows, that sort of stuff, absolutely fair game. I think there should be the ability to use any skill, whether it's spear, mace, whatever. I think, like, like Hammer of the Gods requiring a mace, when they're then using weapon switch to create an added level of required complexity when they could just allow that skill to be used anyway, like arbitrarily. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you look at, like, Last Epoch has a very similar skill called, I think it's Forge Strike. Um, you can just use that with any weapon. It doesn't need to be specific to a hammer or whatever. You can use it with a sword or whatever it might be. The other one that gets me is support gems. So you have one support gem, except for the Gemling Legionnaire that can use a support gem twice. You've got support gems, but then you're making like all these like support gems that are specifically designed to work with skills, and obviously they cross over and use in other skills. But one of the things that I really liked about Path of Exile 1's gem system, and the thing that made it so lucrative, was the ability to use like multiple combustion skill gems in a setup on multiple skills. And in one way, Path of Exile 1's skill system was much more lucrative in being able to vary and make open like decision making because you could use martial tempo in multiple skills because you want to build a really fast character. Knowing that like the trade-off really is that you're not putting another damage like a flat damage
Right.
skill gem in there or like an ignite skill gem or something.
The trade-off is already there. We
Yeah.
we don't need necessarily, if the numbers are balanced right, we don't need the added trade-off of only being able to use one, because like, the ultimate the best damage is gonna be whatever the best damage is,
Yeah.
and you're gonna give something up if I want it to go faster, or if I want it to consume an ignite, or if I wanna, be able to move faster while I use the skill. It's yeah. We don't need the rails. So, that's more about the rails and the design. On the topic of the actual player mechanics versus that ability to build. So, what what is it serving? If we had our way and we could fix it so that the gems worked exactly as we wanted, what is our end goal vision? And maybe you and me have different ones. I
Mm.
don't know, but like is Path of Exile 2 a game that you should be able to, with enough investment and planning, and you've got your skill gems perfect, and you've put your 5 mirrors into the build, should you be able to trivialize it? And this kinda goes to what we were talking about before, or I know that there are people who would argue and say, "No, there should always be limits. There should be, something above which you cannot go. Like, otherwise, what's the point?" So what do you think? Should there be an upper limit to what you can do in an RPG, and
So
what is it?
after designing builds and doing build guides and whatnot for a very long amount of time, the one thing that I learned is that the second that you put limiters on things, you start to create the tier system. Like Diablo, for example. Diablo, each class is like what, 6 builds because
Yep,
it's so targeted and narrow. Whereas like I could take a Shield Crush build in Path of Exile 1 and that Shield Crush build could be as strong as a Frostblade build, or that Frostblade build could be as strong as Bone Shadow build, or Bone Shadow could be as strong as an Incinerate or a Lightning Tendrils build, or whatever it might be. But the difference between the builds is the level of time and investment into the actual gearing and items, and this sort of comes back to having a meaningful crafting system at the end of the day, and it's something that sort of PoE2 lacks right now because you can't really metacraft easily. Like but like there should be there should be no real limit. Like when we start talking about like I think there needs to be skills need to be balanced in the first place so that they don't get out
sure.
of
Oh, yeah.
control. And I think that's the first. I always come back to this. It's the skills that have broken interactions and are not balanced are the ones that are right now one tapping bosses, right? But realistically, like it to nerf them is not to set a limiter, and to nerf them is to bring them down to a level average of every other skill in the game. However, you should still be able to push a build with enough investment and time so that you can one hit, but it's got to be expensive and it's got to be like you've got to put a crazy amount of time into that because at that point you've created an outlier for the right reasons, not because the skill interaction is busted. I think that's the understanding the
Agreed.
difference between gearing and skill setups and yeah.
I would say to somebody who says, I don't want it to be too easy. I don't want to be able to one tap a boss. I want it to be meaningful. I want to say, have you done it? Have you won, like, because there are people who have, and you know what? Those people are more than entitled to their opinion. They've got the time and game and the expertise to have that opinion, but they should recognize they're not everybody.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the time and the expertise to do that. I'm and then for a lot of other people, they're saying, "I don't want it to be trivial," and I would have to respond like, "Don't worry, it won't be." Like, I'm thinking of the people who say like, "Oh, I don't wanna go to the gym and work out because I don't wanna accidentally, wind up looking like Arnold, looking like too much muscles." I'm like, "Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You'll know before you get there. You're not gonna wake up one day and be like, 'Oh, shit.'"
I'm jacked. Oh, I've got 22-inch rims.
Like, it's not trivial in the current state of either game, Path of Exile 1 or 2,
Yeah.
I don't think, to alright, maybe Lightning Spear aside, I don't know, but I stopped.
There's a few shield bleed builds that exist that use elemental. Like I think it's somewhat of a numbers break in the way that bleed scales off elemental damage based on the I think it's the infernalist or the blood mage. And that
Right.
right now is a bit problematic. But yeah, I know exactly
But
what
that
you
goes to
mean.
your point, right? That's just a broken interaction.
Mm,
That's not we're not talking about, like, you do that with a ton of investment or whatever, like,
no,
that's just, "Alright, clean up the egregious stuff," but
yeah,
it's more like, as a general rule, I think if grinding your games were to adopt the philosophy that, like, it's okay if at investment level X, and I get that in a game with an open economy, that's gotta be a bear to balance, to for them to try and figure out, like, "Alright, how much investment is it gonna take the player?" They don't know, like, they
mm,
tweaking drop rates or whatever, but, like, if they were to at least in the back of their heads have the idea that, like, it's cool, it's all right if there are multiple different kinds of builds, the more the better, really, that if you push it far enough, can do the ultra endgame stuff. I think that actually gets you away from a place where everybody feels compelled to play lightning spear or stat stack and quarterstaff or whatever, because that's what happens when they try to bring everything down but don't quite get there. There's always going to be something
yeah.
that people are going to take advantage of.
I think that comes back to when you talk about like currency and level of investment. And this is the argument in the community right now, is the availability of currency to do that exercise. And at the end of the day, like a build should be capped by how much investment you want to put into it, right? So, like if you invest more into a build, your build's going to be stronger. That's how it should be. It shouldn't be because this particular combination works more optimum. Like, and there is an element to that. Like the combination does matter, but it shouldn't be.
Some,
Yeah,
some.
exactly. It shouldn't be totally based on that. It should be based on, oh, I've got availability to generate currency to be able to get this bit. And there are some people that just like market flip. Like if you talk to a lot of people that are sitting on mirrors,
Mm,
right? They just market flip. They just play Path of Hideout all day long. And
Path of
that's,
Alpha, yeah.
yeah, exactly, that Path of Alva. And like, yeah, I don't think you're going to stop. Market flippers have always existed in PoE as it is. Same with bot
I
farming
don't
is a problem,
honestly,
but yeah,
bots are kind of a different story, but, like,
yeah.
I don't know if I care if people are flipping on the market. It's that's always gonna exist, like you said. For those of us who do wanna play the game, kill monsters, and get currency that way, there should at least be meaningful ways to do that,
Hmm.
it um I feel like there's a point I was gonna make, but oh, just the idea that I know that some of what we're saying right now about, like, yes, if you push something far enough, you should be able to trivialize that. I know that there are gonna be people watching the video who don't necessarily agree with that. Like,
Hmm.
please understand, like, I respect your opinion. I don't agree with it. I think if you're a person who, like I said, can routinely, like, you start your Path of Exile 1 or 2 league, and within a week, you've got your multi-mirrors and you're deleting stuff, you're entitled to your opinion.
Exactly.
You're a minority player, like, that is a very small percentage of player base, and what we're talking about here is balancing for the average
Everyday
player.
player, like you know, people that come home from work, people who got families, kids, you know, all that sort of stuff. Like, should the average player be hindered based on, you know, should it just, yeah, and it comes back to how much time do you have to invest in the game? Like that's another different topic about,
I can listen, I can hear them out in the audience right now, I can hear them talking about the Diablo 4 memes. They're like, "Oh, I'm a single dad with 18 kids and 9 jobs," and yeah, like, that's the meme, right? And, like, it
yeah,
should be balanced around me. Again, nuance, please. Like, we're not saying that. We're not saying that. Like, just that, like, not every person who plays the game either takes 3 weeks off of work or doesn't have a routine 9 to 5 day job. Some people who play the game, a sizable chunk of them, I would guess, are either in school or work full time. And so, other than maybe they put in some vacation or leave or whatever, and get a few extra days here and there to play, like, your player base is gonna be people who are maybe averaging a few hours a day at most, and,
well,
like, those are who you're balancing for.
you look at like the player base that would invest the most amount of money into the game as well. Like if you looked at like dollar for investment for the game devs, and this is something that
Love to see those numbers.
I would love to as well. The biggest thing I've always looked at, and the reason why I made my channel in the first place was because build guides at the time, and this was like 6 or 7 years ago, build guides at the time were not constructed in a way that worked. And like you would go and check a build, and like people would leave like standard on into their POB and all this stuff, and it would totally mislead you down the garden path. And then you'd be like, oh, the build doesn't work. What the hell? I've just put in all this time. And like there are a lot of people that like will say um they want to make their own build like last epoch, right? And you can, there's nothing wrong with that if you can, but not everybody can. And I'm noticing this more and more in comments now at PoE 2. And I guess this is maybe we talk about, instead of the question we had lined up, I feel like this is an even better topic of conversation. I
Yeah,
actually
this
sort
is a
of fit.
touchy one.
Yeah.
You know we're gonna strike some nerves here, right? You get that?
Oh yeah. I think there is a middle line on this topic around whether you should be able to create every skill into a build or not, right? So like coming from Path of Exile 1, where like not every combination
Chain hook.
works. Yeah, I've been trying to do chain hook totems for years, and they've never given me the ability to do chain hook
Totems.
totems. I just want to do chain hook totems. And if they ever patch it in, I'm scubbing every build on League Start and doing chain hook totems in PoE1. It doesn't matter. I don't care if it's bad, good or bad. Chain hook totems will be a thing. Um, but where I stand on this after putting out like I've got like 1,000 videos on my channel, and a lot of those are guides and whatever else over the years. And I'm somewhere in the middle. I think like if you can come up with a creative way to make a build work, and there are some great new creators, like I think Cal Torak and or Cal Torok or Rak. I put him on a curation the other day. He's got some great stuff on his channel. There's also some other really fantastic new creators that are coming up with really innovative stuff. I've heard some of the comments about like people like that's not a real build. Well, like
How so?
exactly like oh, it doesn't do enough damage. It doesn't one tap a boss. But like, what is your metric for determining what a build is and isn't? And like, if somebody finds something fun, like I'd say that's a build. If it's doing like my metric for PoE2 right now is if it can do T15 plus maps, it's a
Yeah.
build. Like that's a build.
I mean, like, we don't even need to limit that to PoE2. Like this happened in PoE1 all the time. How many times would you build like you remember the corrupting fever champions where
Yep.
like it was famous. You weren't bossing with that build.
No.
That was a T16 map blaster. Is that not a build? It's fine.
This is something around builds that I find interesting with PoE2. So like when they set out, and I saw this initially, and this is some of the criticisms I place towards this design methodology, right? They want every build to be able to play all content, right? So whether it's Delirium or
It's tough.
and I don't think that that's possible because that content to be unique and meaningful in its own way may require a very unique and meaningful approach. It's the same with
I want that. If it's
exactly.
not that way, it should be that way.
You want generic.
No, no, no. If
Oh,
no, I'm with you to
yeah,
the extent that like if PoE2 could use more specialization into different content types matched up
yeah,
with different build archetypes, I want that. I don't want everything to devolve into like a samey like everybody's got to blast the map in 45 seconds and like give me something interesting. Delve PoE1 Delve is a very different experience than
yeah.
mapping. Simulacrum, very different experience, requires a different build. You're not going to do
Blight,
that with any old mapping build.
blight farmers is another
Blight,
example. Yep, minion builds and
Blight's always
carrying
got a
golem.
special place in my heart.
I know. It's
Yeah,
I got buddies that run it. And the thing about it is like having specialized content. And this is one of the actual problems with the end game as it is right now. People say it's boring because what they did is they took the thing that made Path of Exile really special, and that was about being able to specialize. So it's not it's not a specific specialization. For people who play the game who are watching this, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. It's not a specific specialization in that you click a box to say this character does X, right? It's implied specialization based on the build archetype that you want to play and based on on the content you want to play. So, for example, like Delve players by nature, right? And I'm a Delve player. We run heavy tanky builds that don't do as much damage unless you're running Molten Striker Zenith. That can take a lot of abuse and damage. But like, are we the
yeah.
fastest map blasters? No, we're not fast at map blasting, but we can out survive every other build. Blight players play builds that basically can take on whole entire wide areas of damage, i.e. minions. Carrying golems were very big for a long time, still are sort of big and whatnot. Um, so you would build around that. Same with breach players, same with heist runners, same with all that sort of stuff. And it still sort of exists in Path of Exile 2. Like there were Queen of the Forest runners, or like Trial of Sekima runners, and people are trying to do that. But because the way that they set the end game up, they targeted the content so that it's like generic. And this comes back to an argument that people were playing to defend like I don't like this argument about, oh, the game needs to be made for specific people. I think the game should be made for all people to be able to play. I don't think that drowns the quality of the game out. I think what drowns the
No.
quality of the game out is when the game isn't set up in such a way that different people can play the game in different ways, the way that they want to play the game.
We're accidentally covering another bullet point, which is good news.
Oh,
We're kind of touching on is if there's a compromise either in the degree of how much mechanical skill versus build power, or here's what we're talking about: compromise in terms of gameplay content that allows meaningful fights to coexist in a game with meaningful. Because this is to your point, different players with different priorities can coexist in this game. I believe that. I
yeah,
believe that with the right design, you can have certain content types and certain build types that really focus on that, 3, 4 button combo and making sure that you're positioning right. And also, there can be content and there can be builds that let you kind of like turn your brain off a little bit. Like, I don't know about you, my brain is never truly off when I'm playing. Like,
yeah,
more than likely, I'm like planning some build or like I'm thinking about what upgrade I've got going on next. So, like, even when we talk about brain off, like I feel like that's a little bit of a of a misnomer. Like I'm not actually brain off. Not the point though. But like, yeah, I think there's a compromise here that like give us something that lets combo. And here's another piece of it. I think is don't and this is hard to build around, hard to design around, I'm sure, but, like, I don't want combo gameplay to feel mandatory, like I'm being locked out of doing any damage if I don't do it,
yeah.
but sure, give me a bonus if I pull it off right, like, make that explosion really impressive and go far if I pull off the right thing. You know, balance around the carrot, not the stick. Don't punish
Yeah.
me for not being able to do it.
If I want to walk up to a boss with a really tanky character and just use a single sword strike, but but I'm okay with taking 5 minutes to do that fight, but I
Right.
can take every hit. I should be allowed to do that. Like,
Yes.
and like if you do, like you said, if you do the combo play, right? Yeah, you can wipe the boss in 20 seconds. Fantastic. But I want to be
Sure.
lazy. So,
Yes,
like,
let me pay for lazy. Let me pay for lazy. Yes, let combo-based gameplay maybe take
yeah,
shortcut is too derogatory, but like let combo-based gameplay get a leg up and not have to invest as much currency or time in order to do the kind of damage or survive the kind of content. But if a person wants to push it past that, don't make it mandatory. But if a person wants to push it past that and be lazy and just sit there and smack the boss with their sword or one tap 'em, let me invest enough to do that
yeah.
eventually. Let it
Just
be out there on the horizon.
and that's the difference between like an endurance player and an active player. Like, some people do want that short, like I know, like going to ExileCon, right? Lightning Arrow players from Path of Exile 1 are a totally different breed of player. Like, either way you shake it, they are totally degenerate. Like, no offense to anyone who plays Lightning Arrow, but I don't know how you do that from league starts. But
I
like,
never have.
mate, talking to this one guy at ExileCon, he was like, I only play Lightning Arrow. It's the greatest skill ever made. I'm like, really, is it, bro? And he's like, yes. Every other skill is bad. And it's like, more power
You
to
know
you.
what? There is a place in this game, I think, for him as much as anybody. I think the people who
That
want to specialize in one skill and have be degenerate speed, cool, more power to him. Keep in mind, I'm sitting here arguing for some degree of zoomy gameplay or one tapping bosses. Keep in mind, that's not actually even how I play the game. Like,
yeah,
if people look at the builds that I put out, like, I'm not putting out like crazy, degenerate, speedy, zoomy stuff. Like, I just like the idea that it's there.
yeah,
If I want to play it, if somebody else wants to play it, if I want to push my build to get closer to that, but like I'm playing Aegis Aurora stuff like you, man. Like I don't.
yeah. Like, I love that sort of play. And I think, just coming back to the question, is like, I think skill should not be an inhibitor to allowing people to play different types of content. That's one thing. Like, there has to be a degree of understanding
Mechanical
the content.
skill or
Well, I think, like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, I think, like, there are mechanics within content that you have to learn and that you have to master, and that's different to how, you hit space on the keyboard, right? So, like if we talk
absolutely.
about PoE 1, right? The Crystal King is one of my favorite bosses. It's
Mhm.
mechanics you have to learn, but like, the difference between that and learning, or like being more skilled at the game, is where I sort of draw a line, and I'm like, like, yeah, you should be able to learn the telegraphing of the boss and all the rest of it, and that should be the limit. But having to be like having this edge lord like approach to hitting spacebar at the exact right time and stuff like that is like with very little leniency doesn't really lend itself to be played by people who maybe have a bit slower reaction time or whatnot. And I feel like the whole argument where like if you're one of those players, the game is not made for you. I feel that's a really disingenuous argument because it's just excluding a heap of player out of the player pool. I think,
And frankly, if anything, like, well, then which genre is for the player who wants to
yeah,
outgear the content? Like, isn't that like one of the main draws of an ARPG is that I
yeah,
can put the time in if I am not a mechanically gifted player, and I'm not. I'm never pretending to be a mechanically gifted player. Like my first run through PoE 2, do you have any idea how many times I died to Count Geonor, the Act 1 boss? Like it was a ridiculous, outrageous number of deaths. And you know what? Not mechanically gifted though I am, on my second league start, no gear, no nothing, I got him down in 1.
yeah.
You know, I think they nerfed him, right? Like, he was nerfed a little bit, but also I learned the content, and
That's
that's
it.
okay.
That's it. Like, you know, and like I'll be candid with you on the point too. It was a bit more gruff, but like I'm the same as you. Like I'm a tank player, so I the first thing I did at the end of point one was I went back and I went, okay, I'm going to do a run, but I'm going to do a run based on how I play the game, not based on how the game's telling me I should play. And
Right.
I then rolled a really tanky setup. I took a POB and I went, oh, I could adjust this, make it work a few different ways the way that I play. And my run went really well. I think I did it on stream. And then when point two came out, like everybody was like up in arms and everything about it. And I was like, well, I sort of overcame this issue a bit because I went back and I learnt the mechanics of the game a bit and whatnot, and I learnt how to gear out those mechanics to overcome them very early on.
That's a different interesting element. So, I mean, we've been talking about the like the gear as a the gear in the build as as one sliding scale of how good is it, like how much do you put into it versus the mechanical skill. But then there's also this third thing we haven't been talking about, which is how good are you at understanding the math of the game. That's a third thing altogether. It's
Yeah,
neither of the other two.
and this is why, like at the moment, I'm taking a very positive stance to the game. I actually think, and I know this is a controversial point, but the changes they made, so the issues that I had with point one, like I have issues with a large number of things, as many other people do, right? Down to some of the, you know, pacing, well, a lot of the pacing of the game. I was saying very early on, the campaign pacing is cracked. Like for you and me, 20 hours on a campaign is a significant time investment when you have other responsibilities and you can't live stream or play 24 hours a day. It's not
And
practical.
I'd be lucky to do this campaign in 20, by the way. That's on the low end, put it that way.
Exactly. And like many people sort of sit in the same circumstance, like the vast majority of players. And that's why people weren't upset initially because it was the honeymoon period. But now it's
Yeah.
set in and it's like, oh, is this how the game's going to be? Like, this is not good. And
Not to
I
do a victory lap, but you and I called that, right? Like, we were saying that the whole
yeah,
time of like, I know that this feels cool now. I get it too. The environment, the atmosphere of the game, but like, please, for those of you who have not played through an ARPG campaign 50 plus times, please try to consider how this is going to feel next year and the year after that.
it's
And maybe some players aren't going to be playing this for 2 plus years, and that's cool too. But for those of us who are, that campaign is a little rough.
and that was the criticisms, and obviously that met ire from the community at the point in time when we made the criticisms. And now, like we're like, okay, we understand mechanically how the game works, and we understand this was the direction at the point. And the community spoke, and I've sort of like some people say, oh, this feedback provider, rah, rah. But if you were to go check a number of videos from 4 months ago and all the articles that came out on all the different news reporting, rest of it, not to name and shame, they were all praising the game for what it was. But for those of us that had played, like, you know, for me, I played since the PoE 1 closed beta, right? So, and you know, you're probably very similar in the situation there too, Buffalo. Like, um, we knew what we were walking into, but many other people didn't. And then they're like, "Oh, this is fantastic, amazing," until you realize every single tune that you play, you have to do that over and over and over again. And even with tricked up early gear, it's still slow.
So this goes to kind of the theme of this video, and let's talk about this a little bit. So like there are people out there, and even now, yes, it's true that some people have kind of like seen the light and been like, oh, I really don't want to do this every time. Hold on. But there are also still people, you can find them,
Hmm.
they're out there, who are saying, no, the campaign is the only good part of this game. And then you get to the end game and it sucks. What would you say to somebody who says right now they've played through 5 to 10 characters, say, or across the two, point oh, point 0.1, point 0.2. What do you say to somebody who says the campaign is the best or even only good part of the game and then mapping sucks? What's
So my stance is the same as it was a number of months ago, is that that is problematic. And the reason why that's problematic is because when GGG does an actual league with league content, it's not the campaign that the content is focused to, it's the end game that it's
true?
focused to. And so while somebody might enjoy the campaign, and there were people that scorned me over making this comment, but this is the vast like consensus of comment across the community. The campaign is a tutorial to get to the real game, which is the end game. And that's where you're going to spend 90% of your time. And so, while the people who enjoy the campaign, that's fantastic. And if they enjoy the campaign and they want to keep rerunning low level characters, more power to them. Go crazy. But the vast majority of players that will be playing the game into the long term will be looking to the end game and what will be added to the end game and the difficulty spike and curve that comes with that and the potential. Like Molyneux builds, sorry to say, you've got to be level 78 to run that item. You're not playing that in early
Sure,
game.
but that's fair. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and okay, and I see what you mean. I see your point there. That like that's when you really get to. And I've said this all along. I say this in all my videos that like the your build might not even come online until you're in maps.
Yeah.
You might just not exist in its format. So then what do we say to the player who says like, great, but you say it's all well and good for me to play the campaign, but you're also asking for the campaign to be nerfed and easier for the long-term players who want to play it 30 times. I say fair, I guess. I just is this one of those fundamental design conflicts where it's some people want one thing, some people want the other, and if they do enough, if grinding your games does enough to cater to us and makes the campaign smoother,
Hmm.
not take 30 plus hours, are there some people who are just going to be put out by that and there's no avoiding it? Like, do they just have to suck it up or what?
I think so. We come back to what happened in Path of Exile 1 with this. And originally, the campaign playthrough, it used to be Act 1 and 2 in the early act, in the closed beta and the open, or the closed beta. And then it went to Act 3 and I think 4. And then they added Act 5. And then they did the expansion that added the last 5 acts in, right? Um, Now, when you initially played it through, it was pretty grueling. It was really, really hard. What they learned early on is exactly what's happening now is not the first time that it's happened with GGG nor Path of Exile. It happened in Path of Exile 1. And the same issue with 5 links being the cap on the links to easily get, and 6 links being really rare. The whole game as it is right now is just literally repeating history as it was in Path of Exile 1. And exactly what's happened with the uproar from the player base right now has already happened with Path of Exile 1. None of this is new. And so and that's maybe why you and I aren't really that upset by anything. And like I'm choosing to take a positive stance on it because I'm like, okay, if we overcome the issues when they're this hard or difficult, guess what? When they're not as difficult, boy, we're going to have a lot of fun. Like, and if you can find the fun now, you are going to find nothing but endless fun later down the track because all of this stuff is going to come down a peg. And unfortunately, the reality for the players that are like, I love the campaign. If you love it for the story, fantastic. But don't expect that campaign to take the same form as what it is right now. And very likely when they add the last 3 acts in, which will probably be in the next few patches, hopefully, or maybe in 2 or 3 months' time, and they'll probably get more classes to go in, you'll probably find the scaling across the board will be totally different. Because even if you look at the scaling right now, you go between the zone of Act 1 to 2, right? And you transition the gear, like if you looked at like a transition like that is how it should go right now. PoE2 goes sort of like, and it just jumps, like it's jagged and it feels jagged, and so your gear sort of runs out of scope very quickly. Like you can go even between the last 2 zones in Act 1, and you go from like where Freyathorn is and whatnot and Ogham Village, and then you go into that next zone and the difficulty spikes and it makes no
It's so
sense.
apparent. You feel it immediately.
Hmm.
You'd be crazy not to feel it. Yeah.
And
Um,
that's really problematic. Like, yeah.
yeah. And so to those players, here's the thing. Now, setting aside whether it should be one way or the other, I've got a prediction. I mean, and I'm with you. I think it is going to be a certain way. They are eventually going to scale it back, and I think this is for the simple reason that like the people who are going to play long term, like I don't know the numbers on this, but I'm guessing that there is a bias if you were to do a survey in the people who say campaign's the best part of the game, mapping sucks. Like I'm betting that their average number of playthroughs, regardless of what changes were made to the game, is going to be lower than somebody who says that they love mapping and they love build creation and they love getting to end game and all that stuff. Those players are going to go through more, and so just by design, like just the way it's going to shake out is that they're the ones who are going to be commenting in the community more consistently, and the game is going to respond to their feedback because they're the ones who are around. So, like, I think, re- regrettably for the folks, I guess, who want the campaign to remain exactly as it is and get no easier, no smoother, I think it's probably inevitable. I'm guessing, like, just over time, that type of change is going to happen.
It'll be about a player numbers and retention game. So once they start to see, and this is why the league system was created in Path of Exile 1, and why eventually power creep occurred over time, because players wanted more power and more agency. And so they had to add that into the game, and then they had to add harder and harder content, and then it sort of spiraled out of control. And unfortunately, the way that Path of Exile 2 is looking, like the first patches that came out after the initial patch when the uproar occurred were just like flat plain, like across the board nerfs. And now when you play it through, it feels pretty okay from Act 1. Like it's enjoyable. If you've got like pre-spec gear, even better. Even currency drops, they haven't said anything, but that stuff's been buffed. Like it's a lot better than when the point two first came out. And that, like it's pretty apparent from running multiple, like I'm on my fourth character tune run at this point, and I notice a night and day difference from day one through to day like three versus what's happening now. And they already noted that they were going to adjust loot drops, and I feel like they've already somewhat retooled it back to what it was last league because or last patch
You didn't
because
have any rarity out of your gear or anything, did you? Just checking for no.
no, just as is. Like it's still less than what it was in point one when they patched it in, but I'm getting like exalts and everything dropping through the campaign. But also that's interesting because like some players are getting really good RNG and others aren't. And is there a reason for that? That could be a conspiracy scenario, or it could just be bad RNG. Like
I'll get the tinfoil. My
exactly.
default is always gonna be until demonstrated otherwise, RNG is gonna RNG. This is
That's
not a
it.
game with RNG protection, and sometimes you get screwed.
Yep. I know exactly what I mean. I've had one mage blood drop in my whole time playing Path of Exile 1. So sometime.
I think my best raw drops ever maybe were, um, a pair of mirror shards from Harbinger, maybe. Like, I don't
I had
see,
a
have I
mi-
ever dropped
I had a mirror drop 8 years ago. I
nice,
remember
still
it.
riding
I
that
think
high.
I spent
Yeah.
it. I spent it because I didn't know what it did at that point. And they went, "Oh
Uh,
no, I shouldn't have done that." Um, hindsight, hindsight's an amazing
so
thing to
good.
have. But I guess that sort of leads us into a bit of the next question that we've got. It's the third last one on the list, which is how much of our conversation, sort of that we've been talking about here, speaks to the element of PoE 1 and we just want, or even if we talk about the community as a whole, how much of this is leading to PoE 2 should just be a clone of PoE 1. And I like this question that you've drafted here too, whereas like is it we want PoE 1 to become PoE 2, and is that because we love PoE 1, or it's just because what we're used to? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I doubt that I'm gonna say anything super fresh and new. This has been hashed over so many times. Anybody watching has been, like, hanging out in the comment sections and the Reddit threads and everything, like, probably not gonna hear anything super new from me on this, but here's the way I'll put it. Um, I will acknowledge that many of my requests, wish list, whatever, for PoE 2 are things that, like, if you look at it, you're like, "Yeah, that's gonna make it more similar to PoE 1." Um, I'm I'm biased, and I happen to think that that will make it a better game because I think Path of Exile 1 is an amazing game. I think that's not a coincidence. Like, I think, like, the reason I want it to be that way is because it was really, really good. There are people who disagree. There are people who bounced off Path of Exile 1. They said it wasn't for them for one reason or another. Well, maybe we're just going to be in disagreement then, I guess. But I think it would be good because when we talk about what's good for the game, it's like you said, you're talking about player retention numbers. Like this is about getting players to come back for league start, buy your microtransactions, stick around for at least a couple weeks, right? And the players who are going to be doing that, grinding your game should not throw out their decade plus of experience crafting a game that catered to that playstyle, that is bespoke, custom designed to bring people back for between 2 weeks and 2 months, a few times a year. So yeah, am I asking for things that would make the game more similar to PoE 1? I guess. Originally it was just going to be redone riggings and a new campaign for PoE 1, right? Like PoE 2 got split off early in development process. And the most common argument against it is like, well, you've got PoE 1 if you want to do zoomy blasty, whatever. Let us have PoE 2 for meaningful combat, and combos and all that stuff. I some of the arguments I make are not just because I think it should be closer to PoE 1. I make some of these arguments because I don't think you could. Like, I think long term, you're not going to be able to design a game that does the things that people are asking for, the things people think they want. I don't know if you're going to have a game 3 years from now that is still bringing those players or any players back. Like, so like when I say I don't want to have to do 4 combos per pack regardless of what build I'm running, that's because I don't think the game lasts very long if that's enforced by fiat. So like I am to a degree saying what I think is good for the game. It just so happens that I love PoE 1 because it did that stuff well. And I don't think PoE 1 was as much of a Zoom fest as people seem to think. I don't know how many people who accuse it of that have played it for thousands of hours as we have. I mean, I don't even want to look at my
I
number
got
of hours on Steam right now.
I got 9,000.
So technically, I've got over 7, but I know a lot of that is like I'll come back in the morning after going to bed and be like, "Shit, I left the game on overnight." So like that's not
Yeah.
always accurate, but like certainly like I can vouch for thousands, right? And like take it from us, like we we know what it takes to make a game last a while, or at least I don't know, maybe just for us. I would be curious, the people who are asking for more meaningful, slow combat in all situations. Like, do you have games that you've put 5,000-6,000 hours into? What are those games? Because I don't know them.
Exactly. Like I couldn't tell you the last game that I played that I sunk anywhere near the sort of hours in was Battlefield 4, right? Battlefield 3 and 4. Like even if you
Yeah,
combine them, like I played a lot of Diablo 2 back in the day and I loved it, but I never loved it anywhere near as much as Path of Exile 1. Like, there have been many, many times where yeah, even I say to the person that I'm currently going out with, I'm like, League launch day, guess what? I am non-contactable. Like, and I'll take a day off for it. Like I've done all of that
me too.
stuff, and yeah, and I've never missed a league launch at the end of the day, and I've never done that with any other video game. And I guess it's something that you learn maybe as you get a little bit older too. That like you get less time, so you get this one little thing that keeps you grounded to yeah, it keeps you centered, and that for me is Path of Exile. Like I love Path of Exile. Like I live and breathe it. I've got a map over there. I've been to ExileCon twice and everything else. I've never done that for any other video game in the history of things. I think where I sit with it is and I'll be honest, I really liked the initial the idea of having both games combined, right? I thought that was really good. And
Yep.
we saw Chris Wilson leave, and I feel like some of this is because of the change in management over time. And I will avoid the conversation of the argument, the vision. Sorry, that we don't want to talk about the vision because they've been, for anyone who doesn't know, the vision has existed as a meme for the last decade, and
Long time.
every league in the history of Path of Exile, like Calandra was like the pinnacle of the vision, and it also.
Anybody who has rose tinted glasses on Chris Wilson, and I love the guy, but like, please look at the forums, look at Reddit and everything from back when he was in charge. Like, he was getting flack the same way the developers now are. So like,
Oh, it was bad, and and the thing that like I did my video about a week ago on like the tone of other creators and stuff. And the thing about it, it's not necessarily the message that they're putting forward is incorrect. It's the way that they present it.
Oh yeah.
And the like, you know, we're having a pretty reasonable conversation. It's respectful. Like I'm not, neither of us are going to turn around and throw shade at the devs because totally understand. Like
Not gonna happen.
right now, they have a huge issue to balance, which is they've got this a game that they've basically put 11 years of investment plus into. They've got to figure out how to keep that going, and they haven't put out a meaningful patch in nearly what 9 to 12 months on that. And then on the other
Yep.
side, they've got a new product on the market, which they don't know how to balance because they can't sort of gauge the market. And like you had to look at the Steam reviews went to negative the other week. That's
Yep.
really bad. Like from an investment standpoint, from a financial standpoint, that's horrific. Like that kind of. So obviously, like me as a businessman, I would look at that and go, we're gonna have to halt the old product that makes less money, and we're gonna have to put it in the
Yeah.
new. But like,
I
what
didn't like it, but
it
you
is what
know,
it is. Like they're a business. If they don't do that, they're not going to exist in 12 months. So that's part of the problem. Now, if you ask me like what I think whether I think Path of Exile 2 should be should be like Path of Exile 1, no. I think it has to be different. Not necessarily because it should be different, but because it's got to be more modern and it's got to take some different elements of approach. I think it needs to be somewhere between where Path of Exile 2 is right now and where Path of Exile 1 is. Like if they found an intersect right in the center, not the same, but different enough to make it unique. And I feel that would be a really good feel of a game. Like it respects your time, for example, is the biggest one. So like campaign doesn't take 20 hours to level through. 8 to 12, 8 at a really fast pace, 12 to 13 hours at a slower pace. If you're really slow, okay, 16 to 18 hours if you're really slow. That's at the bottom end of the speed market, right? But like I feel like 12 hours is a sweet spot. Like that's one full day of grind on a Saturday.
and for anybody who is the big campaign fan who's watching, keep in mind, like the first time you do it, that's not going to be the way of it, right? Like, what was your first Path of Exile 1 campaign? Like, first, I guess for you, you kind of experienced it as it came out, act by act. For me, I started in 3.09, so I experienced the 10-act campaign basically with a few tweaks as it is right now. And my first campaign was so long. And
Yeah.
sure, yeah, now I can do it in 12 or less, but I didn't then. So, like, yeah, I wouldn't worry that by catering to this, we're, like, ruining the new player experience or something. Like, they're still gonna be immersed, engaged. They're not gonna whip through the campaign in a day and be done with it. Mm-mm.
Yeah,
That's not a concern.
exactly. And that's it. So like the first playthrough is always going to be slow because you don't know what you're doing. It's a new game. You got to learn all the mechanics. But once you've done it a number of times, then it's like okay, it's just like I can go through it now. I know where everything is. It's the same with PoE 1. I know where everything is. I know where to go. It's like I can do it in like 14 to 15 hours now. But and that would be considered, I guess, a faster average pace. But like most often players are doing like 18 to 22 hours or whatever it might be. I still think that's too slow. Like there's a lot of winding unnecessary, like jank in the campaign as well. There's a lot of what I call like forced mechanics in the campaign, like the well system. I think is ridiculous. Like it doesn't need to
Uh-huh.
exist. Like and like Act 3, when you're in the second time zone in the the Vale Temple, you've got to then go. You got a portal back, then you got to go back through the portal to get to the
So,
well.
I can't tell if you watched my most recent video or not, but I've called these things
Yeah.
out specifically, like, by name. So, just we're clearly on the same page there.
Exactly.
Just for some personal life timing stuff, probably wanna get to the last, couple
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
if we could,
I think we've sort of covered off on the zoominess of it. So
probably.
we've got the last question here. Can a game exist to cater to players who like to see whole packs explode, or also cater to players who hate zoomy explode combat, or does GGG have to pick a lane?
You know my position. I've said it before in this talk. I think there's a compromise there. I don't know if it's gonna perfectly satisfy everybody, but I think that especially if they focus on different builds, specializing in different combat types, I do think that players can live and let live on this one. That if a player can be reasonable and not look over at what Jim across the street is doing and say, like, "I don't want him doing that," Like, as long as you can focus on yourself there, as long as it's not ruining the economy for that person, there's no reason why the 2 can't coexist. Like, I'm thinking of, like, you know, Jim at the office is, on a diet and he gets mad at you for bringing in donuts and eating them, right? Like, no, you're the one on the diet. Like, if you wanna stick to that, that's cool, but, like, I'm having my donut. And so, like, as long as it's not busting up the economy, and I know that that's hard to balance for, I think that you can have the folks who want speedy, zoomy, brain off, whatever you wanna call it, they want to aspire to that, they can live, and the folks who want the engaging combat can have that too. I don't think they have to be in fundamental conflict. What about you?
I think it's pretty simple. Like balance the skills, let the gear do the speaking for the pace of the build. So the better the
Yeah.
gear, if the skills are relatively equalized in their outputs, damages, it's the form that's different, or the mechanics that are different, or the playstyle that's different, but they hit a baseline for where a skill should sit at an average level. But the thing that varies the ability for that skill is all of the gear and the investment behind it. Then the only difference between a skill being more powerful than another one, or the same skill being both not powerful and powerful, is the person that plays the skill and the level of time and investment they put into making it better and more optimized. I feel like that is probably, and that's probably the PoE 1. Like there are skills that don't work in PoE 1,
I
but
yes, no, I think you're very accurately describing how it works in PoE 1, and I'm sitting here, I'm wondering to myself, like, the people who are very, very opposed, the vocal ones who really don't like the zoomy gameplay, they don't even want it to be in the game, like, I'm sitting here wondering 'cause I haven't heard one of them say this one way or the other, like, do they want all that, like, super top end gear investment, time investment to still only get you to a place where you have to do meaningful combat all the time? Because to me, that feels like a treadmill. That feels like you're just watching the number go up.
hmm.
You're not the bill doesn't feel different to play, and I'm just wondering what's the attraction of everybody being tied to that treadmill? Like, yeah, I don't get it.
What I noticed interestingly is the same people who want meaningful combat are okay with one hitting bosses at the very end of the game.
Okay,
And
then maybe we're not in disagreement. All right, maybe we
I found that dichotomy really interesting. It comes out in comments a lot where like the same people that want like the meaningful combat then go, oh, but when I hit maps, I should be able to one tap a T4 pinnacle. And it's like I'm of the notion that maybe they don't understand how an ARPG like Path of Exile should be balanced in the first place. And it could be from a
maybe.
position where there's not a lot of experience with ARPGs or whatnot. But like I don't understand how you go from like being having fun in a campaign where you're saying it's really hard, but then you still want to get to the end and like one tap bosses based on jank setups. And I don't know. It's incongruent to me. Like to me, that the scale
Yeah,
should be you put time and you scale up and then you hit the heroes. It's like the hero's journey scenario. Like the more time you invest
yeah.
into it, investment and whatnot, you should be able to hit that peak by the very end. But it should be a relatively like ordinal scale that you go up by. It shouldn't be like really hard down here and then you just go straight up to the top because you put on a few
The number
items.
of videos that I've got where I make this exact hand motion praising Path of Exile 1's scaling and how, you start feeling very weak, multiple hits to whack a zombie to death, and then you slowly, steadily, surely over time build to something very strong. I think that's one of the great strengths of the game. I
Mm.
think Path of
Because
Exile 2 should
it
lean
feels good.
into that.
Yeah, your early mapping is like your jank period. You get out of the campaign
Yeah.
feeling like a god, and then you hit mapping, and you're like, okay, I got to
Uh-oh.
rebalance. Yeah, now I got to get my resistances capped. I got to do all this, and then you hit mid mapping. You're like, all right, I think this is coming along, and then you hit T16s, and you're like, all right, I'm nuking the game, and then you realize you ain't worth nothing because you get up to your first pinnacle boss, and they whoop your butt,
Yeah.
and then you're like, all right, how do I overcome the pinnacle now? And that scaling in PoE 1 is perfect. It feels good. You never feel bored with the campaign. It's just like people got bored because they had to do the campaign, not because the
Yep.
campaign was bad and it didn't scale. And I think that's where the feedback was misinterpreted by GGG.
And I'm just coming back to a point you made earlier, about the pinnacle bosses. We talked earlier, like there is still skill based, like learn the mechanics, get out of the way of stuff, unless you are playing the most degenerate. of one tap builds, which is such a small minority of players are getting to their first Uber Maven and bringing their 14 billion damage ice trap or whatever. That's nobody. Like I encourage players to actually try it out. Like because I
Yeah.
think the skillful, meaningful combat. I do not beat Maven every time that I fight her. Let me be very clear about that. I am not a mechanically gifted player, and I've fought the Maven a lot of times now. So like it's there.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be every pack of monsters, but yeah, I think it's okay.
I,
Like, you
I
can build, trivialize it if you want, but most players don't.
I always brick Maven because I always run like Bone Shatter or Shield Crush, and then when the
Oh, yeah.
no regen thing kicks in and hits you, like, ah, like I hate this.
I
Like,
don't I don't think I've ever survived the full duration of that no re like, if I get hit by the no regen, I'm like,
oh, you're
"Well,
screwed.
that's all. I'm just dead now."
You're
Like, I don't
like,
think I've ever survived it.
just kill me, let me respawn in, and then she just catches you in the loop, and you go to the memory game. And yeah, I hate that. I hate that fight. That it's like people would argue and say it's a great fight. I hate that fight. Like, I think I like the old
But
fashioned like I like Uber Elder
you
to be
can't deny
honest.
it's a skill check.
It is
Uber Elder's good.
it's a skill check. Yeah, I've never done Uber Maven. I've never done Uber Cyrus. I've done the Ubers for everything else, but yeah, actually not neither the oh, I'm losing the names for it. The fire boss.
Oh, the Exarch and the
Yeah,
EA?
yeah,
Yeah.
Searing Exarch. Yeah. I've never done Uber of that, but I've done Uber of everything else. But like, they're just like not things that I fight. But if you ask me, have I fought a 900 depth Crystal King? Hell yeah, I have. Those things can hit harder than any Uber pinnacle that's like cracked up on crack. Um, but yeah, like I don't know. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see where GGG goes with all the feedback now that the community's sort of
Yeah.
uprose a bit and what their decisions will be. I'm very interested to see where everything goes at this point. It's a mystery.
Next major balance patch. What are we gonna see? You know, I truly don't know. Uh, I mean, I think that they even internally have some conflicting design decisions, and this is like we said, I'm not knocking them at all. I'm not in the building. I'm not in the room. These are human beings who are working hard to try and make something good. So, like, even if they make an objective mistake or something that I see as a mistake, which are two different things, even then, I'm not ragging on them.
Hmm.
Like, they're working hard, but there does seem to be some kind of, and we've talked about this in Path of Exile 1 too, the kind of like push and pull of the two design ethos and like which one's going to win in the next patch. Like so far, I've got to say, there's been several wins for the requests that people like you and me have made, like
Yeah,
the portals. Come on. Like that was a concession. We kind of figured they were going to make it eventually.
that
They
was
did.
it was
I'm in favor.
honestly, it was the only like there were a few things that I wanted that I had on my ticket list that I wanted fixed. And endgame map portals, that was maybe the only thing that made the game like that was the thing that made me hate Path of Exile 2 initially. That they fixed that one system. I was like, all right, you can throw anything at me at this point. That was the one thing that I hated, and they took it away.
It
And I
feels so much better. Even with, you know what? This goes to your point about compromise between Path of Exile 1 and 2. They did. The portal system is not the same as
no
it was in Path of Exile
sliding
1.
scale.
You get fewer portals if you have harder content,
Yep.
and bosses reset. Neither of those things are true in PoE 1. The system still feels good in PoE 2 because they compromised.
I don't mind it. Like some Delve players would be like, "Oh, it feels something." For me, it feels like Delve, and like,
It does. It does
but
feel like Delve.
and that's actually the problem with it because like Delve was an acquired game mode in Path of Exile 1, and it wasn't something that everybody liked. And so now people are like, "Oh, this feels like crap," and it's like, well, for players like me, it's good, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, um, I don't know. I think like more changes like that, balance across the board. I keep coming back to the term. It's just it's all a numbers game at this stage with balance, like taking down the timers on the wind-ups for mace skills. The other problem is like we're missing like 70% of the content for the game too. So like
Yeah.
that's the other big issue. We're missing like entire weapon classes.
Let me give you an example of this that I only just discovered last night, right?
Mm,
So I've got a siege cascade tactician, right? And I was looking around for all these different ways to abuse the new shard scavenger, where you you get this, instant reloading crossbow bolts as long as you consume ignite shock freeze, whatever. Specifics don't matter. What matters is that I was like, man, I wish that I could give a minion, an attack to do that would they could trigger part of it, and then I could use my attack to trigger the other part of the combo so that from my perspective, it's a one button build. Lo and behold, there is a skill gem planned to be in the game. It is another type of companion, like the Roa, like the Beast and everything, just called Summon Companion, and it's a dude that is even pictured in the tactician's portrait. There's a dude who you equip him with an attack. It's the thing that would tie the build together. It would take the build from kind of amusing jank to like smooth and playable. The whole tactician seems designed around this business of like adding weapon damage to your companion, all that stuff. Like, and it's just not there. So how many things are that's what I'm trying to drive at. Like, how many things are there that like that that if you drop this piece into place that is coming, suddenly it would put a ribbon on the whole thing. Put a
Yeah.
bow on the whole thing, and it would feel different.
So I
We don't
mean,
know.
they've got unarmed nodes. There's no unarmed. They've got dagger nodes and sword
You're
nodes.
right.
There's no swords or daggers in the game yet. Like we're missing heaps of stuff. Like we don't have mines in the game. We don't have traps in the game. We don't have any of the stuff in the game that would be in the game. I think like people just need to take a chill pill a little bit and just go, okay, we're missing a lot of content. And like uniques, like there's probably tons of uniques that haven't been finished yet. There's rebalance passes of uniques and everything. Like we just gotta
And these things happen synergistically, right?
mm,
So let's go back to your example of your monk who's stacking strength, right? And you are struggling with the defense. These additions happen synergistically. So what I'm saying is if more stuff had been added, you might have something in the game that's meh by itself. Like what about Shaper's Touch? Now you stack strength and you get defense on a monk archetype. You can get
yep.
your energy shield for something like that. And that's just these little things that if you add one or two of them, maybe it doesn't make a difference. If you add 1,000 little tools, suddenly you have all these little things to pick and choose from, and that could solve your problem and put the ribbon on your build.
And this is part of the problem of comparing it with Path of Exile 1 is because PoE 1 is a completed game where all those little tools exist. And PoE 2 is nowhere near completion where most of those tools haven't been added. So, and this was always going to be an inevitable problem with Path of Exile 2 at the end of the day because people were always going to go back and compare it to the first iteration. And you just can't right now. And so it's like
I
being,
know.
you got to be fair and reasonable and equitable about it. And I think like, I see people crying over it on live streams and stuff like that. They really need to like chill out. Going to another game and defecting and not giving it a fair crack is, like I think that's just a cop out. Like, and the funny thing is, a lot of those people will be back in 2 to 3 weeks anyway. So,
Well, it's a balance, right? So like here's the thing. I'm never going to hold it against somebody if they say, "Look, I'm legitimately not having a good time."
hmm,
And I'm not going to play something for 12 hours a day where I'm just straight not having a good time. That's fine.
yeah,
I think that's different from having a doom and gloom attitude of like, this is terrible. If you enjoy it, you're terrible. It's never going to be better, yada yada.
one
No,
hundred
just like
percent.
take your ball, go home, come back tomorrow. Hey, join us in 3.26, which is what June. Come to PoE 1, check it out. If you're a PoE 2 only player, check that out with us. But I think that over time, PoE 2 is going to develop and get better, and so I'm going to keep checking back in on it. I might not put quite as many hours into it as I do into PoE 1. It's so right now PoE 1 is still kind of my main game, but yeah, don't be unfair to it. Like it's
Yeah,
in early access. They are listening. They are making changes. It may not be perfect, it may not be your cup of tea, but it'll get there.
that's it. I think that gets us to our nearly an hour and a half here.
Nearly.
we
We're
did
gonna
we
have to
did
cut this up, something fierce.
we did well. Oh, I think we did pretty well actually.
I
Um,
think so.
but anyway, for those of you who haven't checked out Baron's channel, there'll be a link in the description, and make sure you go and like and sub to his channel as well. Otherwise, if you want to comment below, feel free to do so. Any links or anything that we've discussed here will be in the description. We'll cut this up so that you can like move between the video and different parts if you want to. But anyway, until next time, we'll see you guys later on, and have a good one.
Take it easy.